Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the LATAM Stocks Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Flood. Today I'm speaking with Lucas Abreu. Lucas is a venture capitalist based in Brazil. He regularly publishes about venture capital and startups in Latin America in his Substack, including an annual report he puts together called The Next Big Thing in LATAM. And that's what we're mostly going to discuss today. So let's get right into it. Hi, Lucas. How are you?
Hey Patrick, I'm good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. So before we get into the report and the actual market stuff, I want to hear more about you because I'm always interested to hear from guys like you, young guys that started out in venture capital and right into entrepreneurship and startups. Because 10 years ago when I got to Brazil, that wasn't the case. So I feel like you're kind of a new breed of Brazilians working with startups. So tell me about how you got started in venture capital, where you're from, why'd you choose a career in venture?
Cool, Patrick. I must tell that was more about lucky to join the venture capital world and to become in love with it. So I'm from Aracaju, which is the capital of the smallest state in Brazil. And then I moved to São Paulo to study at FGV. And during FGV, I was engaged in several activities outside class. And I co-founded one group named the Entrepreneurship League, and we invited several entrepreneurs to help us to talk with the members, and some of them were just entrepreneurs and also tech entrepreneurs. So it was 2015, 2016, and we were able to talk with David Velez from Nubank. Imagine like 10 almost 10 years ago, before he was like named the one of the most important entrepreneurs in the region. We talked with Sergio from Creditas. We talked with several others entrepreneurs the early stage. And at that moment, I realized that, okay, these are maybe the coolest people I ever talked. So I want to be close with them. And then when I decided to work, I was wondering if I was going to create my own startup, but I was too young, or if I was going to work in a venture capital firm. And I was able to work in a venture capital firm. It was a completely different moment. For example, the market, the total investment in startups when I joined the market was 2017. It was less than $1 billion in all over Latin America. And just in comparison, in 2017, in 2021, it was $17 billion. So it's a market that during my time at the market, it grew over 15 times. And then it got a bit of a crash, and it's 5 times lower than the highest moment. But that's how I got into venture. And I really liked the work in the venture capital world. I really liked the idea of thinking strategically about different topics. And also, as tech is an emerging trend in Latin America, I was able to saw and to leave a bit of the impact. So that's kind of a bit of my background and how I joined this market.
Yeah, it's interesting you say live a bit of the impact because there's so many venture-backed startups now that I use in Brazil on a daily basis. So it really has come a long way. So tell me a little bit more about the Substack and the next big thing report that you write. What kind of stuff do you write about? How has Substack been for you as an author? I'm curious to hear your experience.
Nice. So I started to write back in 2020. And at the time, one of my first articles were how to break into VC. And in that article, I left my mail and I said, if you have interest to join a VC firm and you want to talk, let's chat for 30 minutes. I don't have an answer, but I can help with my experience. And with that, I was able to talk with over 70 people that wanted to work in venture capital. So right now, several analysts, associates from some of the top tier Latin America VC firms. I talked when they decided to enter in VC. And that was special because I saw how impactful and how many people I could meet through writing. And I was a big fan of several Substacks from American writers such as Not Boring from PAC, the journalist Mario Gabriele. And I was feeling this desire of creating and writing about things that I've been seeing on the ground. And then I decided to create a Substack. And when I created, I made a deal with myself. I said, okay, I will write for 3 months every week. If I like it, I will continue to do so. If I don't like it, I will stop it. And after 3 months and after like 12 articles at that time, I said, okay, this is like amazing, because I started to meet so many different people. And in the other side, I believe I have become a more kind of a clear thinker. And that's the thing of when you write. When you write, you try to create something that is different. You invest a lot of your time. So I think you kind of become a better thinker. And it has been awesome. Like, I think right now I have wrote over 135 articles, and usually I write on Sundays. So I have one series named Sunday Drops. And on the parallel of that, I always like to pursue new projects. So I'm always looking for something different to write. And there is one report on the US that I really like, named also The Next Big Thing. And it was my biggest inspiration. It's a report wrote by Nikhil Basu. And the whole idea is, how do we get some of the thought leaders to give a perspective on the biggest trends for the next year? And then I joined forces with Julia De Luca, which is like one of the most well-known, most talented people in LATAM. So we decided to create The Next Big Thing LATAM. And the whole idea was to create a map for the next big trends that are happening in the region by the perspective of several different type of people. So everyone that are like a thought leader, but like investors, the growth investors, venture capital investors, seed founders, unicorn founders, Series A founders, exit founders, politicians. We have a senator. And we said, okay, we want to catch the eyes from the thought leaders for what they are seeing as a big trend for next year in the region. And since the LATAM, we have so many different problems and solutions, I think it gives a bit of a fresh perspective on the future. So that was the idea. And we did like already 2 editions.
So tell me a little more then about how you collect the data, because the report this year, it's really useful, but it's very concise, right? Like it's a paragraph from everybody and it's broken into sections. But how do you go then and get that from the people? So like, do you send them a questionnaire? Do you reach out to a couple hundred people and 100 respond? Like, how do you actually get the full data set, and then how do you choose how to condense it?
It's super simple. We just ask, what is the next big thing That's it. What is the next big thing the next year? And we say, please try to answer in one idea in the max 3 paragraphs. That's the only restriction we have. But the whole idea is to get truly what they are seeing, and we try to not think much about it or edit much, like to get like a raw answer.
So then what are some of the things you've learned about venture capital? Like, what are the big macro learnings you've taken away now from doing the report for 2 years?
It's funny because predictions are predictions, and by default, all the predictions are wrong, because there is always something like out of the blue. And when we started, it was in the moment that OpenAI released the ChatGPT 3. But I do believe that at that time, we didn't have so many people saying, at the end of 2022, we have not so many people talking about AI. But what we have learned, I think, as a venture capitalist and all the venture capitalists, we are always looking into what is the next current new thing. Like, we have to be a path ahead of the future, or try to be a path ahead, and we are going to be wrong so many times. But I think that what the next big thing, LATAM, the whole idea is to get a fresh perspective on what is going to happen in the near future. For example, for this year, I can say that AI, we kind of got in a place where we can use AI for general solutions. We can use it for personal use, but definitely we have a long road ahead. And so, for example, for next year, one of the major trends in AI is explainable AI. So how can we control more the algorithm? So it's always about that. It's all about the different stuff that it's coming up and what is the next big trend that is happening. But as I said, predictions are predictions. So predictions are usually wrong, but but the exercise, it's so important.
So before we get into the report, and we're going to read off a few of the quotes and the learnings, and then we're going to talk about them. Let's level set a little bit. And I just want to ask you, you mentioned that, 17x, right? The size of the LATAM VC market went up like crazy, and now it's correcting. Everyone's seen the data, right? Funding's been down. So can you just tell me, like, what are your views on the current state of venture capital in Latin America? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? Any specific markets or industries? Just what's your general overview of the markets before we get into some of the more specific stuff?
So, as I said, when I joined the VC market, it was completely different. The industry was so much smaller. And then we got a huge increase in 3 years doing all the macro. So we become like 5 times bigger. And then we crashed so it's 2 years in a row that I think we are smaller at least 2 times. But I think that at this moment the VC market has reached a mature moment, as a mature phase. So, and why I say that is that, okay, I think that the France has gone away, but we have like a stability in terms of new deals. We have like a stability of dry powder for each stage of financing. So if you are a founder, if you have an ambitious project and you are trying to create a new startup in the early stage, probably you are going to be able to raise money with the VC firms because the VC firms still have dry powder. So in the pre-seed, in the seed, in the Series A, if you think about the Series B and the Series C, there is money, there is international money. Just in 2024, we have saw like companies as Conta Simples and some others raising rounds, Incognia from Bessemer. So I think that in this moment, there is definitely less liquidity, but as there is liquidity, and this is the most important thing for venture capital market. I was talking with one of the most important investors in the region, and he was an entrepreneur back in 2013. And he mentioned to me, he said, Lucas, the problem in 2013 and why this moment is so different is because when you had a macro problem, you have no money at all in the region. And this moment is so different because we have like a stability of liquidity. And this is the most important difference. So I think that it's important that we have reached a mature phase in the venture capital all over Latin America. And I am really optimistic because I think there is such a secular trend in so many different big markets. So when you think about the digitalization trend and when you see the level of digitalization in each category in Brazil, you see that there is so much room to grow. There is like so many opportunities to expand the total addressable market. When you see some of the biggest markets in Latin America, some of the biggest problems, you think about agriculture, when you think about health, when you think about security, when you think about like almost all the verticals, you can see the level for potential. When you think about climate and you think like how big is this problem and how important is Brazil, how important is Latin America, you kind of can feel how many opportunities there are. And in the other side of it, there is this thing that we have the Brazilian entrepreneurs in the Latin America as a whole, they are really good. And right now they are so more experienced. So I think we had that bubble in the market. We had so many people buying and investing money like in crazy valuations, and the whole interests were kind of wrong. But that happens in every market that's growing a lot. And I think that the other side of it and the outcome of it would be like the next 2 years, we are going to have so many more entrepreneurs that they are not in the first trip, they're in the second, the third, and more super founders, more prepared people. So I'm really optimistic that we have like a circular trend. We have entrepreneurs, we have like a big addressable market in Latin America. So I truly think that we are in a good position and the market has reached a mature. We have like exits. We have over 600 million people in Latin America. We have international investors that already understand LATAM. So I am really, really optimistic in the long term.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the industry is much more established compared to 10 years ago. There's players that now have a track record and liquidity, and they're not going anywhere. So there's a floor in the industry, right? And just because we're in a cyclical downtrend doesn't mean it won't come back. And then, yeah, I think too, you're right too. There's so many low-hanging fruit for business models that have worked elsewhere that just haven't been implemented in Brazil. I mean, you posted the other day about Mercado Libre, which is the largest e-commerce platform in Latin America, and on $13 billion in revenue, they grew 36%, which is insane. And then you think about the trend in the US where like Shopify style e-commerce still hasn't really caught on here the way it has in the
Yes.
US or Europe. So I think there's just so many low hanging fruit that it's inevitable you're going to see some new unicorns in the next 5, 10 years.
Yeah, think about the local. The local has grown more than 50% in a company that has a market cap of almost $5 billion. Think about a Nubank. Nubank probably is going to grow over 50% also this year. So, and it's all starting from like a really critical mass of revenue. Think about of the level of profitability of Brazilian banks. We have so many opportunities in the region, and I'm a truly believer. And also other secular trend that's important is the willingness of Brazilians to use technology. So we are early adopters. We are major users of social networks, such as like I think that Brazil over WhatsApp has a penetration of over 90%. This is impressive. São Paulo is top three cities for Uber. Brazil is top three countries for Google, for Meta. Like it's for good or for bad, Brazilians use cell phones for over 9 hours a day. So we are tech savvy as a region, and that's important for adopting new tech.
Yeah, Lucas, you took the words out of my mouth. I've made that point so many times to people about Brazilians being such heavy users of tech. And I think it's so important to understand. I remember there was a point in like 2016 or 2017 when I was in Sao Paulo, I would start to get like Uber Eats. I had it in Sao Paulo before it was available in the US. So they started testing products, and it was a super important market. And I couldn't agree more with the point you just made. So let's get into some of the quotes then, because then we can talk industry by industry and get a little more specific. So do you want to highlight any of your favorite quotes? I have a few that we can go into after, but what are some of the most from the most recent, the next big thing report we're talking about?
Okay, nice. There are several. I will highlight one from Shuniata, which is one of the investors that I most respect in the region. Shuniata, he is a general partner at Bicycle, and he says, the next big thing is redefining what big means. The last cycle prioritized growth in scale with almost no attention to capital efficiency or predictability of unit economics or robust organizational structures. Latin America needs more exits to make the the startup flywheel turn. And there are no exits without scale. But gone are the days of scale at any cost. What companies need to crack next which is most offered, is health scale. And I think that's one of the most important quotes because it truly describes the mood of the growth market and the public markets in Latin America, which is when you compare this is the main challenge for Latin America companies to get good exits and to turn the flywheel on in venture capital marketing all over Latin America. Because when you are thinking about exit, you are comparing yourself with the global economy. So you are comparing yourself with the Magnificent Seven. You are comparing yourself with the biggest tech companies. And what we have been seeing, for example, from these early seasons in the US is all the concept of health scale. So how is the time to get fit, how the free cash flow has grown as a company. And I do not think that at this moment, mostly of the Brazilian tech companies that are publicly listed, they are having amazing results in the bottom line. So I think that this is the thing that every board is discussing. I don't know your impressions about it.
No, I that's been one of my biggest criticisms of later stage venture capital companies is that a lot of times they destroy capital, right? They cash burn and they make poor investments, and you can only lose money for so long. So I think his point is very well taken from my perspective that financial discipline is extremely important for startups. And you're not going to get an effective exit, or at least not at the valuation you're hoping for, if you're still cash burn, losing a ton of money, right? If you can show earnings and sustainable cash flows, your prospects for an exit are much better.
Yes. Yes, like Bill Gurley, which is one of my favorite investors, he likes to say that venture capital follows the public markets, usually a few months late, but that's the truth. And right now, the public markets is valuing everyone by the EBITDA or by the free cash flow, and not more with the enterprise value over sales.
Yeah.
So
I saw an interview with Gurley the other day, and he mentioned that a lot of venture capitalists, they don't run discounted cash flows before they make an investment. They like to use price to sales, which is essentially the criticism that you talked about in the quote, which is growth at any cost, right? Because price to sales doesn't tell you much, right? Like you can grow revenue, but if it costs you 3x per dollar, you're losing money, right? So you need to focus on earnings and cash flows more than just the top line. And growth is good,
yes,
but profits are important.
definitely. And another quote that I highlighted is from Fran, which is also investing in Latin America and a host in a podcast named LATAM. And he says, the next big thing in 2024 is Mexico. We already saw a wave of experienced entrepreneurs in Brazil, Colombia, and Argentina. Nubank, Rappi, Mercado Libre. Mexico will start to experience this phenomenon in 2024, where the early employees of the Mexican unicorns will launch their own startups. Mexico will receive similar VC investment as Brazil. When you see the level of investment that Mexico receives in comparison to Brazil, I think that it's in a whole Latin America, Brazil receives about 50 to 55%. Mexico receives about 25%, but it has been growing a lot. I think that if you adjust the level of investment by the size of the population, like we are kind of in a similar level. So I don't think that it will be the same investment, but on a comparison base, okay, maybe. But definitely, I think this is one of the most important frontiers in Latin America, is how Mexico will grow. And as you are seeing the world, the increase of nationalism or even producing your own country, Mexico has become a really interesting place, geopolitic. And I think definitely that its position in the world, it's going to grow and grow and grow. And in that way, it's going to open several opportunities for startups. So, for example, in Mexico, we have been seeing the growth of several logistic companies doing everything they are like exchanging with US. So I think it's proper, and definitely it's a map in the future of what will happen.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons to be very optimistic about Mexico, not just for venture capital, but you mentioned logistics. And I had a guest on, an economist named John Welsh the other day, and he made the point that Mexico is the only country in Latin America with ports on both the Pacific and the Atlantic, which is a very unique opportunity for them, right? So they can do European exports and also Asian exports in a way that not even Brazil can do, even though Brazil's bigger.
Yes. I mentioned one last quote, but it's from Miguel Armasa, which is also an investor based in the US. And he talks about the growth of the vertical SaaS in Latin America. And I truly believe this is one of the most important trends. So, Patrick, what happened in Brazil before is that we got a wave of horizontal software as a service. So imagine a software that can adapt to almost any industry. So management system that works from a restaurant to a theater, but they are not like suited and created for a category. And what have been seen with the growth of cloud, with all the secular trends, is wave of vertical SaaS that are creating more efficiency for a sector. So, for example, if we think about the food chain category, we are seeing the growth of players that are like Toast for Brazil. So yoga and several others that are creating a specific product for restaurants and are also aggregating financial service. So there is like what's happening in several venture capital firms at this moment is vertical SaaS growing in each category. So this is also an interesting trend for me.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know that I have a comment. I'm not a vertical SaaS expert by any means. I mean, I also interviewed William Cordero from SaaSholic, who is, I think, pretty much exclusively investing in vertical SaaS as a niche.
Yes.
So, yeah, so I'm aware that it's a trend for sure, but it's interesting. So before I read off a couple that I highlighted, the point about Mexico, I had an interesting question that maybe you can answer. Like I've often thought that cities like Sao Paulo and Mexico City, like these huge metropolises with high population density, do they have an advantage when it comes to VC-backed companies because they can scale faster in a city? Like if you have a startup, an iFood startup. So if iFood were to start up in Sao Paulo or Florianopolis, right? Like the Sao Paulo one's always going to win because they're going to get to scale faster. Is that right or wrong?
It's a really interesting question. I think that when we're thinking about companies that the competitive advantage is a strong local network effect, definitely it's a win when you start in a big city if you conquer that win. And when we think about, for example, delivery, when you think about ride sharing, it's definitely it's a local network effect that you need. When you reach a critical mass, it becomes really hard to lose that market share. But on the other side, if you have a real advantage when you start smaller to figure out the business model without crashing. Like to attend whole São Paulo as the size of the city, it's so complex that maybe you are going to become really inefficient in that way if you start with one of the companies. And I will mention one example in the delivery side. So in Brazil, we have the most important company in delivery, which is iFood. And iFood has like a really dominant market share, even that I am, for example, a sticker app user because I live in São Paulo. In São Paulo, in the center of São Paulo, if I get like the people from my age, from maybe the same social status, uses more happy. But iFood has gone like all over Brazil, and its overall GMV is so much bigger. So maybe there is advantage, but definitely it's something important to start in a big city. And there are several other startups when you have this component of needs of strong network effect that's important to go to a big city. And I will mention another example. There is one company that is super interesting named Livance. Livance, I will try to make it simple, but it's kind of a WeWork for doctors. So if you think about Livance, which is a WeWork for doctors, you need definitely, maybe the only city which is possible to become a really big company is if you start in Sao Paulo, and then if you go to Mexico City. It's more a strategy of going on metropolis. And for companies like that, it's important to go to the biggest city and to conquer and to create an important and a big moat, which in this case is physical.
I think you just gave me a great segue because I highlighted a few quotes and I actually highlighted the whole health tech section, which is 3 quotes.
Mifano probably, he is in one of his quotes.
Claudio Mifano. Yeah, I thought it was so interesting because I'm covering, by the time this is released, the next company I'm going to cover for my newsletter is AFYA, AFYA, which is the largest private medical education company in Brazil. Yes. And they've aggressively grown out their digital service business via acquisitions. So they've been buying these startups, pharmacy companies. They have a website. It's like an informational website. So there's certainly been exit for startups in the health sector in Brazil. So Claudio Mifano is the first one I have highlighted. So I'll read it off. Co-founder and CEO of Livance. The next big trend will be strategic partnerships between payers and healthcare providers. With the healthcare sector increasingly at a crossroads amidst significant financial losses, and widespread dissatisfaction from nearly all stakeholders, the trend will be strategic partnerships between payers and providers, especially those who can align experience and efficiency with the use of data and technology. Perhaps more than a trend, it will be a matter of survival. So that's pretty good. So what do you think about his quote, I guess? Is there anything that stood out to you?
Yes, definitely. You are studying AFIA, but the healthcare sector is under a lot of stress in Brazil as a whole. So the insurance companies are facing consecutive quarters of negative results. The doctors and the health workers as a whole demanding raises, and the hospitals are in the other side also facing really, really stress and bad results. So it's a system that it's up to be exploded in a way. It's facing a lot of stress at this moment.
When he says partnerships between payers and healthcare providers, possibly as a matter of survival, he means that maybe insurers might need to start acquiring hospitals to control costs themselves or look for solutions with the hospitals somehow to control costs.
Exactly. Because the biggest issue is the conflict of interest. And that's what he says. Okay, when you have the both aligned for the same result, which is probably more efficient, a cheaper system that can attend more people, that's the most important topic to discuss in health, is how do you align the payers and the insurance providers. Now, how can you make both work for the same way, because the interests are completely different in Brazil at this moment. And that's like, how do you think that way? I think that AI can be interesting, because AI can really be an agent for reduce the costs. So it can reduce the frauds, it can reduce the costs. AI, for example, can help with the biggest problem in the market, which is the chronic disease patients. So it can, for example, prevent people to be an early detector of chronic disease. So these are the type of solutions that are going to be able to reduce the overall cost of the healthcare market as a whole. And the only way I can see is through tech, is through AI, is through using better technology providers. But definitely for me, it's one of the most important markets to startups at this moment. We truly need that.
I think that's a perfect segue to the next health tech quote from Manuela Mitchell, who's the co-founder and CEO of Pipu Saúde. The next big trend is the use of AI in healthcare fraud detection, which presents the greatest opportunity for cost reduction. Healthcare spending in Brazil has increased by 20% annually, and fraud represents 10% of that amount. Additionally, there is a cultural shift underway with a growing focus on penalizing fraudulent practices by beneficiaries and service providers, creating the perfect moment for change. So she highlights fraud as a benefit to adopting AI in healthcare, whereas you also highlighted chronic patients and early detection as a way to reduce costs. But both are obviously very positive. And
yes, healthcare inflation is a reality, and it's a reality all over the world, but it's really a big problem at this moment in Brazil. So to combat the healthcare inflation, one of the ways is through AI, through combating the frauds and all the inefficiencies, and we have several inefficiencies in the system. On the other side, I'm optimistic that we are seeing several solutions, for example, in the biotech side. So if you are able, for example, to edit the DNA, or if you are able to, today in the Brazil Journal, which is one of the major outlets in Brazil, there is an article about how we are not going to, how surgeries will become like outdated in 20 years from now. And I'm truly believing that in the case of health, I can see that most of the people that work in health are looking to the problem as an insider, but an external force can be applied. Mm-hmm. And the external force can be like, for example, if you think about one of the most important problems in the world right now, which is obesity, when you think about Ozempic and others a Lycos peak. It's a external factor that can like truly revolutionize that would impact health as a whole.
I'll read off the last one in health tech. Ricardo Salomão, co-founder and managing partner at GreenRock. The next big trend in the healthcare sector in 2024 is solutions aimed at making the system more efficient. In the current complex scenario, with insurers recording billion-dollar losses and providers suffocated by long receivable periods, cost reduction is key. Generally, healthcare still operates with many inefficiencies and will need to adapt to a context of tighter margins. Solutions aimed at automating processes, assisting in the purchase process, or reducing claims are examples of solutions that have great potential for expansion in the demonstrably provided cost savings. In terms of claims reductions, trends such as dehospitalization, population management, preventive care, among others, are worth mentioning. It is important to emphasize that generative artificial intelligence is expected to be a major catalyst for these solutions. So I think that he highlights basically the same thing that Manuela and Claudio highlighted too. But yeah, I think it's a sector worth watching. I'm also interested. No, I was going to ask you the next one though. It's fairly underinvested in terms of venture capital in Brazil. Do you agree? I know like 40 to 50% of all the venture capital dollars go to fintech, right? But health tech is also, or healthcare is a huge industry, and it just seems to get less attention from venture capitalists. If you agree or disagree.
I agree. It's underinvested. And I think that it's underinvested because it has a lot of regulatory. So there is a regulatory risk. It's really complex to join the health tech world in Latin America. Also, there is some system problems. So that's kind of a straight learning that I had working with some health techs, that in Brazil, we have only two management systems that are like the hospital management systems, and they are dated from back then the 20s. Like they are really, really old, and they are really, really bad in terms of using APIs. And so this is a big problem that in a way it doesn't help to drive the innovation agenda. But in the other side, I think that we are reaching a moment, it's a critical moment that everyone is looking into this problem, and every player wants to work harder on that. So I think that we are in an inflection moment for health techs, and I hope to see the increase of new health tech solutions in the upcoming years in Latin America.
Yeah, Brazil has a fairly unique system, or century system, where there's public healthcare, there's SUS, but then there's also a pretty robust private healthcare market. And you can't really talk about it without talking about the public system. Do you think the government healthcare holds back innovation in health tech? Is that the reason they're still using 1920s management processes?
I don't think so, because I believe that the overall NPS is low. So there are several opportunities if you have like a good distribution, a good product. But other problem for health techs in Latin America is that the overall exits in health are low. So when I say low, there are a lot of exits in the healthcare markets, especially in the past few years when we had overall consolidation of hospitals. So, but I think that the biggest exit was maybe Santa Catarina Hospital for, I think it was 3 billion reais. And mostly of the exit were like local players being sold by 300 million reais. Which is like definitely is a lot of money. It's a lot of money for Latin America, but it's not the money that every VC is looking for, given the power law. So I don't see someone buying like health techs at this moment in Latin America, and that's a problem. But I think it will be changed in the long term.
Interesting. All right. So last quote I'll highlight. This one is from Lacedo Oliveira, who's a Brazilian senator, and this isn't political. I don't know what state he's from or even what political party he's in, but it's an industry I'm fascinated about, and I think it's ag tech is what he's talking about. So here's the quote. The next big trend for the development of our country is to make it self-sufficient in fertilizer. This is a matter of national security. It makes no sense for us to be a major food producer, but dependent on imported fertilizers. To address this problem, the ProFert Fertilizer Industry Development Program is on the agenda in the National Congress, which ensures incentives for investments in projects to deploy, expand, or modernize infrastructure for the fertilizer production and its inputs. The initiative was based on the National Fertilizer Plan and seeks to reduce external dependence, improve the business environment, and attract investment to the sector. So, what do you think about ag tech in general? We can talk about fertilizer more specifically if you want, but I took that to mean how important it is for Brazil to continue to invest in its agriculture industry and innovative solutions. I mean, the most mind blowing for me is how underinvested ag tech is relative. I think it gets less than 5% of the VC dollars in Brazil.
Yes.
Brazil exports 25% of the world's beef, corn. They're the largest orange juice producer. I mean, it's the world's grocery store, but it seems completely ignored by the technology industry.
Yes. So for me, it's also an amazing and really interesting topic because Brazil, the most important sector by far is agriculture. Brazil relies on agriculture, and we have this geopolitical importance because of agriculture. And I think that why agriculture, it's like what matters for agriculture. And what matters is productivity by hectare and some other stuff as logistic costs. But if you think about truly like productivity per hectare, this is not a problem that is mostly solved by startups. And in agriculture, all over the world is usually being solved by the incumbents. So I usually say that the agriculture market is really tech. You have seen like the whole trend of tech in the agriculture, the mechanization, but this is usually different than other markets that's driven by the incumbents. So if you think about a company as John Deere, if you think of what they're providing of tech for the farmers in Brazil and all over the world, it's like so impressive. So I think this is like the major influence. And if you think about other big markets, is the ag fintech. And I think there are several interesting companies trying to create something unique on the ag fintech market. But also there is the influence of the Bank of Brazil, which is like by far the major player in the ag fintech market in the region. But there are several interesting companies emerging in the ag tech market. And I'm truly bullish, especially when it involves the fintech side of it. Because I think the other side has been driven by the old school incumbents.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a ton of opportunity for funding too, right? Because it's such a huge industry and it grows every year. It's been in a secular uptrend for like 20 or 30 years, agriculture in Brazil. So it seems reasonable to think they still need financing. Do you think a part of it is cultural too? Is it that it's just a different region that maybe isn't as tech focused? I mean, Brazil in general, like you mentioned earlier, is extremely heavy tech users, but do you think regionally it's just that where the agriculture is produced just isn't as tech obsessed as Sao Paulo or Rio or the city dwellers?
Yes, I think there is other important factor, which is the concentration index. That if you think like 20% of the farmers probably produce like 80% of the output. And the other farmers, which are not as tech savvy, they are not as focused on using tech. And definitely there's this cultural factor that is really, when you think, for example, about the go-to-market strategy, how do you go to a farmer that is producing beans in Maranhão? It's super hard. So I think that the go-to-market also is pretty expensive. And so we have not saw yet company thriving in the small and medium farmers in Latin America as a whole. But I think there is, because of the go-to-market, because of the willingness to use tech, as you mentioned. But I think that we are in an inflection moment right now. So I can mention, for example, one company that I'm pretty excited, named Thrive. And Thrive is using data to unlock the credit for agricultures all over Brazil. And it's a really, really interesting company that is like truly trying to create impact, because credit in Brazil, it's hard to get for farmers because no one understands, because it has so many complexities. All over, by the weather, by the price of the commodities and everything else. So, but definitely it's underinvested. I would truly get more risk on agritechs.
Yeah, I think exits are harder too in the agriculture industry. Like I own a company, Kepler Weber, and they're the largest grain silo producer in Latin America. They have like 40% market share. And they made a tech acquisition. And it's like this Internet of Things, and like it's a digital monitor of like grain levels and humidity levels of the silo. So where the farmers keep their
Yes.
corn. I go, wow, that's an amazing company. What a great startup. These guys must have had a great exit. And Kepler Weber basically stole the company for like 5 million reais. It was like they paid nothing for it. And I was like, well, that's tough.
It's distribution is also a problem. It's really hard, especially if you has this physical component.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you think, for example, Lavoro is one company, it's a reseller. There is this consolidation player, and it's right now it's listed. Friedberg, the host of Awin, he was the major sponsor of this SPAC. He is also board member, but he is trying to consolidate the resellers in Brazil, the grain resellers. It's a super interesting case. So I think there are several opportunities. Definitely is underlooked. It's going to be a hard year for agro in the region, tight margin, several things. But this opens up for opportunities of using tech to leverage the operations.
Yeah, I think long term, if you look out 5 years, it's hard to imagine that ag tech isn't bigger than it is today in Brazil. I mean, it's just such a big industry, and it seems so underserved from a technology perspective. But any other thoughts in general before we finish up? Anything we didn't cover that you want to talk about?
Yes, I think that one for example, if it's I will talk about the AI because AI was a major trend on the next big thing report. And my impression is that in Brazil in AI, we are going to see some solutions in the application layer. But definitely as in the cloud, we are not going to see like some companies doing being critical in the infrastructure or creating foundational models. So in a way, we are going to be spectators in the market, and we are going to apply in the application layer. It reminds me a bit of the cloud, for example. That of course we have benefit. We talked with several companies that are only possible because of the cloud infrastructure, but we have not had like a cloud company created by a Brazilian or founded in Brazil. And I think that AI will be the same answer, but definitely it will be opportunity to increase the low productivity of some jobs in Latin America as a whole. And we are starting to see some interesting entrepreneurs working hard on creating something into a specific sector or trying to replace a specific job in AI. So it's also something that I'm pretty bullish in the region.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that, once it starts to get heavier adoption, that Brazilians aren't a big part of it.
Yes, it's also a good place to test a big database because Brazil is diverse. Right. And you can try with many different people.
That's true too. Brazil has a scale that most other countries don't have, especially when you consider how tech savvy they are. So you have digital data and a huge database. But Lucas, this was a fascinating conversation. I'm really grateful for you taking the time. Where can listeners find you, follow your work, get the next big thing report? Give them a send off, please.
It was a pleasure, Patrick. My Twitter, Abreu Notes. LinkedIn, follow me, Lucas Abreu. And my Substack is abreu.substack.com. So you can find a bit of my thoughts over in these three places. And also the next big thing is on my Substack.
Awesome. I will link all of that stuff.
And on Julia De Luca Substack, which is juliadeluca.substack.com.
Perfect. I will link all that in the show notes so listeners can find it. Thanks again, Lucas. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Be good.